Live, the very first podcast of the rebranded platform. So I'm privileged. This is not the first time you and I have spoken, but I'm going to do an intro for you and then correct me wherever I go wrong on this one. So Peter ONeill is a senior solutions engineer at Teleport, focusing on secure and scalable cloud native infrastructure, which actually is where you and I first met a few years ago, working in this space. With extensive experience in Kubernetes, DevOps, and cloud tech, Peter has led successful migrations, built resilient CI/CD pipelines, and guided engineering teams in adopting best practice for modern infrastructure.
Mhm.
Anything I missed there, or did that pretty much sum you up?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. And right, like you said, like we met when I was doing more infrastructure deployment. Now I've kind of moved on to the security side of the house, right? So now it's like taking all of that infrastructure knowledge and knowing like how do we now put security on top of it so that resilient systems are also secure systems, right? And like this is something that for right the last couple of years we're just been like inundated with all of this noise around like how security is becoming the most crucial thing because there's just
Mhm.
so much happening.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, there's so much happening, and we've only got about 30 minutes today, so we definitely won't cover everything. But 100% couldn't agree more. I think when it comes to security, conversation you and I have had oftentimes is that it can often be an afterthought for a lot of
Mhm.
businesses, at which point they're already playing catch up because of some vulnerabilities that have been identified rather than baking it in from the very beginning. So that's the issue I see. But great, let's dive in. So you're coming up to almost 1 year at
Mhm.
Teleport. I think it's about 10 or 11 months. So why don't we just start with a high level? Who are they? And then what made you join them?
Yeah, definitely. And so I was before this just like a cloud architect, right? So pretty much design the system, help engineers deploy it, and like kind of get set up. And so I was doing that for much bigger companies, much larger, like Fortune 400 type companies that, right, it's just massive in scale. And so anything you're doing is a very small piece in a large machine, and it's like you're helping one team with one small project. And I wanted to move back into like the startup world. Like the startup ecosystem is just a bit more fun, right? Things are moving very quickly. Your hands-on tech that's like emerging versus hands-on tech that was like you're in the laggards territory. And so this ended up being a better fit for the type of work I wanted to do. And so obviously there's so many startups out there. And so I came across Teleport from another friend that happened to work here, right? And then once I heard about Teleport, right, played around with the tool set, right? They're open source, so I was able to get my hands on the open source tooling and deploy some stuff and kind of just get a feel for it. And I was realized very quickly that it is well within my skill set, right? Like everything's works very well with the cloud native stack, right? A lot of it's built on Kubernetes, right? We have other deployment options, but like Kubernetes is kind of our like default, and so like it just fit very well with what I like to do, and so the transition in felt very smooth for me.
Okay, that's nice. And as you say, there are a ton of startups out there. But I guess because of the environment that these guys work within, you kind of come from that Kubernetes and cloud native background, security being a big deal, obviously, not just now, but historically and moving forward as well, especially with everyone's favorite buzzword AI, which we'll come on to a bit later. But that's cool. That's cool. So a year in, you're a solutions engineer by
Mhm.
title, but you haven't always been a solutions engineer. You just mentioned a moment ago coming from more of a solution architecture background. So, what does a solutions engineer at Teleport do?
Yeah, and I feel like most places the role is pretty similar, right? Like I think the more generic term here is pre-sales. Pre-sales like technical enablement, right? It's you can think of it more as like almost implementation or even like customer success, but without a paid contract, right? Like this is that, maybe 2 week, maybe a month, maybe a few months for a large account, right? But that solutions engineer is going to take that pre-sales process and help a prospect potential client understand the value that they are going to get with the system, right? So a lot of it is, very early on with that like discovery call and asking about what a client or prospect is working on, understanding, why we're having this conversation in the first place, right? Like for teleport and for a security solution, sometimes it's, the need is as or like the urgency is really high because a breach has recently occurred and they realize there's holes in the security system. Or the other side of it is like the prospect is very proactive and what they're looking for is like, okay, yeah, we're building with velocity right now, but if you build with velocity and you don't secure along the way, right, like within 2 years there's too many holes to even find, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we definitely see both sides of the house on that, and it's understanding why they're looking and how we can best provide that value to them, and trying to condense that all into as short of a pre-sales motion as possible for them. And so that's kind of the value that a solutions engineer brings, but it's very much on the engineering side. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Fine. So still fairly technical then, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, like typically for most places, right, a solutions engineer is going to be paired with some sort of account executive, right? And so that's like those two go hand in hand, where a lot of the business value, pricing, negotiation, stipulations, legal, all that stuff, like account executive side, and then actual implementation, discovery of technology, figuring out who's going to be that technical champion that's going to like work to deploy stuff, like that stuff falls more on the solutions engineering side. So it's like those two pieces. If you're at a really small company, that might be one and the same, but typically those two roles kind of get split out so that way, the person who's figuring out how to deploy the tech doesn't also have to figure out how to do the terms and conditions on the legal side, right? Like it's just like it's two different ways of thinking about, or two different sides of the problem, that it's like each one is very individualized.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so without naming names and without giving too much away, you mentioned there about if a company hasn't really thought about security until 2 years down the line, there's going to be too many holes for them to even try and find. What's some of the horror stories that you've seen since being there?
Yeah, definitely. And that's always an interesting one because, right, like, so any deal that we go into, we sign an MNDA, right, a mutual non-disclosure. And right, so it's like we come in after some of these incidents and we basically hear this like, oh yeah, like we lost whatever, 1 million records of customer data, we lost credit card information, we lost whatever it is, passwords, and we had to make everyone reset. And what's interesting about that is that the stories, while all unique to the company because their data is unique, their product is unique, the security holes typically aren't unique,
Hmm.
right? This is something like standing passwords were left in like inside the code, or right, a CI/CD pipeline wasn't properly secured, right? And so these credentials that live for, months, if not years, right, are kind of sitting around waiting to be found. And so that's something that's like, because that is so common, like, and we wish it wasn't, we wish things were secure by design, but because that is
Hmm.
so common, right, that is something that like we talk about at Teleport a lot, is that, right, all of our credentials are ephemeral, right? So it's like once you're inside the system, right, we receive ephemeral credentials from, let's say Okta is the identity provider, right? We're receiving that OIDC token, that's ephemeral. The user then logs in and they receive an X509 certificate as their authentication. And that's ephemeral for whatever, 4 hours, 12 hours, something like that.
Hmm.
That reaches out to a resource, which on that connection is also going to be ephemeral, right? So there's no credentials along the way to be lost or stolen. And so that's kind of the reason when we're like talking to these companies that have recently gone through the like, I forget what the word for this is, but like, yeah, like the post-mortem like situation, and they're like, how
Yeah.
did this happen, right? Like, and they're like figuring this out and they realize where the holes are. And right, that's where those conversations really like start to dive deep, and like, oh, well, how do you remove all these passwords? And so yeah, like they're always very simple problems. It's typically not done out of like or like the accidents are done out of like simple mistakes that like developers make all the time. And so being able to remove the ability to make mistakes is something we focus on quite a bit.
That's interesting. Did you hear about the attack on Marks and Spencers in the UK?
No, I missed that one.
Yeah, so that's quite a big one, the biggest one that I know of recently. So it made the news. It was in all the headlines. So Marks and Spencers is a big like retail supermarket chain here in the UK, and yeah, the attack was crazy. So what we know so far, so it was in April, and there was a cyber incident. Customers reported payment issues, delays receiving online orders over the Easter weekend. So there were
Mhm.
disruptions to services. Um, 200 agency staff had to be told to stay at home. Yeah, it's a big data breach, big data breach here in the UK, and I haven't dove into it yet. I just wonder what the kind of holes were that you would spot doing your job, and then think, yeah, seen this before, could have been fixed before it even happened.
Yeah, and it typically comes down to an error of process, right? Like if it's not
Mm,
something like that with the leaked credentials, right? It's someone sharing the password. It's someone, right, like not securing, or like poking holes in their security in order to make their job easier, right?
yeah.
Like it's saying like, oh yeah, I put in this back door into the API so that I can do my local development, right? Like it's doing things like that that allows their job to be easier. Because at the end of the day, right? Like if you put the wrong type of security in front and you make all of your developers worse developers because they have to jump through 3 or 4 hoops to work on that backend API, right? They're going to poke a hole in it to make their job easier so that they can work faster, right? So it's definitely a balancing act to say like, how do I implement security without reducing developer velocity, right?
Yeah.
Like, because at the end of the day, if developers can't do their job, then the security is kind of useless, right? Like it's going to create more problems. So it's like figuring out the balance for both. And this is something that like I think what's becoming really popular right now, like Teleport, also based on this technology, is just reverse proxies, right? So it's not just so instead of saying like, oh, anyone is allowed to come in on port 68542, right? Like you get rid of those ports altogether and you make all the connections reversed, and then you use the proxy to maintain the connection, so you can always get in, but the firewall doesn't have any holes in it, right? All of the traffic originates from a TCP connection coming from the destination, and so that way no holes are in the firewall, but clients can always get through based on that reverse proxy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see the value in that. Okay, so we've found out what Teleport do. We've found out what a solution engineer at Teleport does. You've told us, how you make money, what the revenue stream is there. So your your motion within pre-sales, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So pre-sales. So talk to us a little bit about how you run proof of value, how you introduce yourselves, how you get customers comfortable with the product, because security is not really a comfortable topic to talk about a lot of the time.
Yeah, and like we were talking a bit about discovery, right, and understanding if the prospect is like come or has like done any or has any sort of like pain in their technology stack where they're trying to solve it, they're trying to make things easier. And so typically it's my job to connect with the engineers on the team and say like, and once we figured out what that is, right? And then we enter into that POV section, right? And so POV, proof of value, right? I think more historically called POC, proof of concept, right? But at this point, right, most of our technology isn't a concept. Our technology works, it's proven. Now we're just proving out the value based on the information that they've given us. If they've given us the information that, right, as we were talking about, like developers say that getting to their resources is very difficult because they have to use a bastion host, and they use the bastion host, and then they have limited tools on that resource in order to get to the next thing, right? And it takes 15 minutes to set up their connection, and if their Wi-Fi flickers, then they have to start the whole thing over, right? Then it's just like that process is so painful that they're looking for something else. And so that's why when I come in and I say, okay, I can understand where you need to improve this process, and so I will come in, right? Like typically I won't, it's not like white glove service where we go in as like a provider that like deploys everything. We need them to see and feel the value. So we will typically, right, come in, do like an educational Zoom or like an educational kind of meeting where we say like, this is how everything works, right? This is how you're going to deploy it. we'll give them the documentation and guides and things for their specific scenario. And then we will set the timeline, right? And so I will be continuously checking in with the prospects, with the clients. And what's fun about this is like, it could be deals as small as like 25K versus like upwards of $1 million. And like as you like move through this scale, the number of like check boxes that you have to do like increases with like the dollar spend,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so it's like as you talk to some of these, like I know if someone's coming in at that like lower end, I'm like, okay, this is going to be like 2 weeks. You have one problem you want to solve, and then we're basically done, right? Like I come in and say like, deploy this thing, hook it up to this, get your resource connected, and you're good to go, right? And then we move into those like high dollar spend accounts, and then you're like, okay, so we have 3 different teams that we have to enable. Each one of them has different resources on the back end. We have to make sure they can not only access stuff themselves, but share access across teams, and right, like hit all the different like business values, and not even talking about like the account executive stuff where like the legal T's and C's, stuff like that, right? Like, but like just on the engineering side. And so we're having to not only check all these boxes for them, but reevaluate along the way to say like, okay, so as we're proving out the value that you initially thought, is this still what you think the product needs to do? And more often than not, halfway through the POV, they realize that there are additional resources they want to protect. There's additional teams they want to enable. There's different workflows that they want to try, right? Like when you come in and you start working with a tool that's going to, you know, improve how you're doing work, you start to reimagine how you're going to do that work. And so that typically happens halfway through. And so it's just like managing that process for that POV and making sure that along the way they are able to hit all those like markers of success and enjoy using the product, right? Because user experience at the end of the day is like what makes or break a product.
Mm. Yeah, 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 absolutely. And the thing is, when you're talking about user experience, this isn't just some kind of small app or front end thing that we're talking about here, right? This is protecting quite sensitive information a lot of the time, especially in the Marks and Spencer's case that I referenced a moment ago in the UK. So the point that you're kind of making, if I've understood it, is I understand the difference between the POC and the POV because you've just explained it, but you typically start with maybe a small team or a smaller segment of an organization. And then once you've proven the value, not the concept, but the value of what you do and how you do it and why you do it, you then get asked to roll in a number of other teams and a number of other parts of the organization and departments under what you're doing because then you've proven the POV.
Yeah, and that typically happens, right? Like start small and then grow
Mm.
big, right? Like it's something that uh if you're coming in with 2,000 employees, you don't say like, all right, we want them all rolled out day one on for testing. You're just like, okay, yeah, no, like let's start with one engineering team and we'll work up from there, right? Because each team has different requirements and different resources. So
Yeah.
it's like it is typically like let's start small and then let's start to add on more and more protected resources or more and more teams that need to like do this stuff.
That makes sense. Okay, so security in general, very sensitive. Who gets to touch the code? Clearly, you don't
Mhm.
want too many eyes, too many fingers, too many people looking into the code base. So, talk to me a bit about the compliance side of things in terms of ISO, in terms of SOC, securing workloads. Is this all part of your, I guess, your pitch and your daily workload as a solutions engineer?
Yeah, and so I would say ISO and like SOC 2 compliance are probably like the most common where it's like that's at this point just feels like a default, right? Like if you have a security tool and you don't have like those two, then it's like, well, right, this is kind of like the lowest level to entry. And so most prospects that I'm working with on like the smaller, like mid-market size deals, right? Like those are going to be kind of what they're looking for. And right, they're just trying to like check that box. And so typically we'll do like a SaaS offering for them, right? Because that's very easy to achieve with that level of compliance. And so getting them hooked up and enabled and secure as quickly as possible is kind of what we're looking for, right? And this is just like checking those boxes of, right, are your connections protected, right? Is everything secured with encryption? Do you, right, have limited time access on anything, any sort of protected like production resources, right? Like it's all those like standard checklists that you need to do to say like, oh yeah, we are being good Samaritans, or good protector shepherds of our data, right? Like, and it's not like a crazy ask to do these things, right? Like this is kind of just like the default. And then we move into like more complex things like the NIST 800 standards, and we're doing like FedRAMP high deployments where, now all of a sudden it's not just like, are you doing the bare minimum that like you're not leaving unencrypted data out there? It's like, okay, not only are you, so like for FedRAMP high and stuff, it's not only is your data encrypted at rest, but is it also encrypted with the latest technology, or like is it encrypted with approved like FIPS 140 encryption algorithms, right? And does that encryption algorithm exist at every connection point along the way, right? Are you also not leaving any sort of like public IPs out there that can be scanned and checked for vulnerabilities, right? Like it's like the checklist becomes much longer. And so for something like that, right, we'll enter a POV, and the like number of checkboxes that we're like working on becomes much longer. And so it's like I have met, or I've done a handful of like those FedRAMP High POVs with customers, and it's very interesting that it's like most of the people that I meet that do this stuff, like they've already done it a bunch of times. Now they're just doing it with Teleport, right? They're looking for a tool that makes that easier. And so most of the engineers that I've met that have done that, right, like they're building their own like tool sets around this to make that stuff happen. And it's just like there's just so many pieces to it that it's like finding a tool that actually can complete all that stuff like for you and take a lot of that like engineering load off of what they're doing, like so they don't have to maintain their tools, actually becomes very valuable to them.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And as you said, you mentioned they're working with SMBs, so that's a fairly big market in itself. So I can see the value there to those organizations, because they're not quite small enough to be a startup where everything's new. They can bake stuff in early. They don't have too much internal to worry about, as much as maybe like a large corporate who would be completely terrified if there were too many holes, they couldn't even see them. Right. So yeah, I can see why that'd be an interesting challenge.
Mhm.
So time to talk about mine and everybody's favorite topic. We can't have a podcast without mentioning AI.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what something that would be interesting actually would be for me to ask you what new concerns AI brings into the mix from a security perspective. But to add to that question, you mentioned earlier about how you don't really find new problems or new holes. It's the same holes, but obviously just within different organizations or something to that effect. But with AI, you've got AI first companies, AI first startups. You've got other organizations that have been established for a while that are implementing new AI tooling and AI functionality, some of the likes of which we haven't even seen yet, because AI is doing stuff that it could never do before. So does that give you new issues and new security concerns that you've never come across before?
it- a lot of the concerns are very similar, right? They're just presented in different ways. And so it's like at the end of the day, all of the AI stuff is wrapped around massive around amounts of data. And how do you access that data? If you're accessing it with a password in a CI/CD pipeline, it's the same problem, right? Like
Mm,
it's protecting that information. Like I think where we get into the more interesting bits of like what feels new, right, is like, are you familiar with like MCP? Like
mm,
the kind of like so MCP is uh it's a standard released by Anthropic, I believe is Anthropic, that basically is the middle layer between all of the like AI tools and right, all the AI tools and all of the existing like SaaS products that are out there, right? And
okay.
so this middle layer now allows any company to create a connector so that AIs can reach out to them and receive the information that they need in a way that's like useful, so you're not like web scraping. And
Mm.
so this portion of the AI security problem is probably the most interesting, and one that we are starting to tackle now. And we have some cool features coming out around this, right? Like I think I think that like it's an emerging field, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the protocols, the protocols haven't solidified yet, so we can't say exactly how everything will look in the end state. But like as that protocol evolving, also trying to evolve the features around it. And so with these connection points now, right? Like now we are saying, oh, I want my AI to have agency, right? The agentic AI kind of concept, right? So now I want to say like, oh, as my personal assistant AI, I want you to go find me the best deal on flights and hotels and like book all this stuff for me, right? Like that like classic, like, can my AI be my personal assistant, right? And so now it can like directly reach out to whatever the United service and also the Marriott service, right? MCP servers, and like pull all this information and like give you options in a way that's like presentable. And how, if you know that airline is creating this, like how are they protecting that MCP process where they're saying like the AI can come in and get the correct information, but not the incorrect information, not the secure information, right? Like making sure that everything is done in a way that's secure. And so that's kind of what we're looking at as far as like or like new things or new modalities that we are trying to protect. And so I think it's been pretty interesting to kind of learn about a lot of this stuff. Like AI is the one thing that I didn't have any I didn't have any like historical experience with. So it's been a fun learning curve.
Yeah, yeah, and it'd be cool to see how that develops for you and for the industry, the security industry as a whole over the next 1 to 5 years, because I think it for sure is becoming a bit more of a problem. And I know what you were saying about how problems are problems, they're just presented differently. I certainly think with the advancement and the how intelligent AI is becoming, I definitely think there will be problems that may be the same, but that aren't presented in the same way because they do things that they've never done before, this AI
Mhm.
tooling. So it'll be really, really cool, really interesting to see what comes out from a security perspective to be able to combat that. So I'll be keeping a close eye for sure on what you and Teleport do.
Mhm.
So final thing I wanted to talk to you about today is non-human identities.
Mhm.
So this is something that you and I referenced offline a few weeks
Mhm.
ago when we first chatted about coming onto the podcast. So what role does NHI play in your role?
Yeah, so Teleport as a company, we like to say we're in like an identity first infrastructure access solution, right? Meaning that for any sort of connections or any sort of like workflows that happen, right? It's not just that username and password that says this action is authenticated or authorized, right? It's saying that what is the identity that is allowed to take these actions, right? Like if you have a workflow like a CI/CD pipeline, right? Like there should be identities, right? And when I say identities, like we take the human identity that says when I log in with that OICD provider like Google or whatever it is, like I have my identity provided from that, and then I'm authorized to do certain actions. But with non-human identities, now we can get very prescriptive and like very limited on scope and saying like, I need this, automated process to continuously check this Postgres database, but it
Mm.
can only access these tables, right? And so now we can create this identity that's authorized to do very specific things. And right, there's lots of ways to like handle this problem. Right, for us, one of the newer technologies that we're using is Spiffy from the CNCF stack, where we are saying with these Spiffy identities, right? I want my Kubernetes cluster to be able to pull from that backend database in order to send and receive data and update those records. And I want this to happen in a way, right, that's highly secured, right? So once again, back to like that X509 certificates, and then we're doing this with that Spiffy standard and saying like we are essentially becoming the identity broker, where we're brokering these workload identities and putting them on either side and giving the and then like we just become the like trust anchor. We say that like for all of these certificates, you can trust them because you trust the teleport cluster that they're coming from, right? And so we become the identity broker, and we tell them how they're allowed to trust each other. So that way, when the Kubernetes cluster reaches out to the database, it says, here's my SPIFFE ID, and right, this is cryptographically signed with this trust anchor. And so then on the other side, when the database receives it and says, validates that, it's like, yes, your signature matches the trust anchor that I have, right? And so it's like, and then that's how they're able to do that connection with the identities provided by Teleport. And what we're doing here is just like being able to increase the efficiency of these automated workflows in a way that keeps them very secure. So it's not about having that password in the system, but it's about saying every workflow and every action that's taken has a proven identity that's cryptographically secured.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Is Teleport part of the CNCF community?
It is not. Like I think it's a CNCF member, but we don't have like a CNCF project.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. So it's a paid member of the CNCF.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm pretty confident that we are, but I don't know like what level we're at or like anything else. But yeah, like so definitely add all of the KubeCons for sure.
That community. So I used to recruit in that community. I think that's when you and I met, right? Maybe like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it was big then. I went to KubeCon this year, just as an attendee, and it was ridiculous. It was like a festival. It was massive.
Yeah, no,
Growing.
it's grown so much, and like, but the people in that community are just like top notch, right? There's so many good people in the Kubernetes space, and yeah, no, I do think it's getting bigger, and like the biggest one that I go to is like AWS reInvent, which is like actually like they have actual music and stages and stuff like that, and I was like one day KubeCon's gonna
Justin
be that
Bieber
big.
turns up.
Yeah.
Imagine. Okay, cool. This has been really, really interesting. I appreciate you coming on. I will release this soon. I'll let you know. I'll keep you updated. But thank you very much. Any closing comments?
Yeah, no, like this was good. I definitely had fun chatting, right? I'm very interested to see the AI space evolve and to figure out how we're gonna like create those secure connections. So I'm sure that, in 6 months, or something, we'll be having a new conversation about new features, about how it all works.
And you'll be like, oh, we found new holes that didn't exist before.
Absolutely.
All right, brilliant. All right, Peter. Well, thanks very much and enjoy your weekend.